Stalin and the rise of World War II. It was early on the morning of June 22nd, 1941. The Nazis poured across the frontier of the Soviet Union in three great parallel surges between the Baltic Sea and the Carpathian Mountains. The Soviet Union was being attacked by the Germans, and they were not prepared for the large invasion. Just weeks before the start of World War II, the nations of Germany and the USSR signed a non-aggression pact with each other, titled the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, vowing to never attack each other and remain neutral if any conflict occurred. Throughout the course of the war, many leaders fought against each other. One of the most influential leaders of the era was Joseph Stalin, in his partaking in the start of the war by signing a pact with Germany to helping the Allies on their way to victory. Stalin had considerable impact on the course of the war. Joseph Stalin, Russia's dictator, did not know that even then Adolf Hitler already had plans for the invasion of Russia in his great war known as World War II. These plans were to be called Operation Barbarossa. The plan was to cross through neutral Ukraine and capture the Russian army in a pincer. Before that, a huge air raid was supposed to take out the Russian Air Force and soften Russian defenses. The entire plan was following the German strategy that now won its so many other countries, the Blitzkrieg. Although it was supposed to be a surprise attack, the force was composed of millions of men, tanks, and horses. Such a force would be impossible to keep secret unless the enemy you are targeting intentionally turns a blind eye to your doings due to their hope that you mean the army for something else. Stalin did exactly this. He hoped desperately that Hitler would honor their pact, though his own spies in Germany and German deserters, soldiers who betrayed Germany, told him Germany was preparing to attack. He waved them off as provocations by the Allies to trick him into joining the war, and had the people who warned him shot. In this case, the term "shoot the messenger" was more than a metaphor. Stalin's arrogance did not stop some of his commanders, though they knew that Stalin would not act and disobeyed orders and prepared for defense, though it got them arrested for treason. For one general who was arrested, he knew his soldiers would fight to the death. Knowing that they retreated, they would be arrested. This was the reason the German attack did go as planned, as the overconfidence of the soldiers made them unsuspecting of the desperate soldiers and so were beaten back. Despite the knowledge of what would happen to them, in these many parts of the army were driven back. One Russian platoon even went a few kilometers into Germany occupied land before returning to Russia. While the Germans were invading, Stalin thought of a counter-initiative. This was the burnt land policy, which is to destroy all resources that the soldiers could possibly use. This meant even destroying items of value: gas, oil, food, metal, wire, and other resources. Because of this, the German supplies dwindled and its tanks eventually ran out of gas, so they needed to be left behind. The loss of tanks took away from much of their forces. World War II was a time of death and destruction, and although it lasted for only 6 years, it was the worst war in all of recorded history, with estimates of over 60 million deaths. An important battle in the course of the war took place in a city then known as Stalingrad. As a matter of fact, the Battle of Stalingrad is often cited as a major turning point for the Allies in World War II. After suffering major damages from the sudden German assault, the USSR was severely weakened, but the worst was not over. On July 17, 1942, the Nazis attacked the city of Stalingrad, a major industrial city in the western part of the Soviet Union. The city was attacked for a number of reasons, like the fact Stalin's name was in it. If it was taken, it would strike a major mortal blow to the Russians and could be used as German propaganda. It was also located near a major supply of Soviet energy, the oil-filled regions of Caucasus. Without its fuel, the Soviet Union's factories would grind to a halt. Thus, the Germans could easily overwhelm the Russian forces and conquer much of the USSR. Instead of concentrating his forces on just one side as to quickly defeat the Soviets, Hitler made a grave mistake. This would cost him the battle, maybe even the entire war. He spread out his forces throughout the Caucasus and the city of Stalingrad. Even though the Russian forces were small, they were almost evenly matched with the Nazi troops now. In September 1942, the German and Sixth Army was sent into Russia with orders from Hitler to overtake Stalingrad. It was led by a man named General Paulus. Stalin enlisted General Zhukov to protect the city, as he had supposedly never lost a battle yet. The two sides, the Germans and the Russians, fought, but they never seemed to overpower each other. Hitler kept withdrawing troops from the Caucasus region and moved them to Stalingrad. Hitler wanted to capture the city because he could not bear its name, the city of Stalin. For him, defeating Stalingrad was like defeating the leader of the USSR himself. Later in the same month, Hitler decided that the city of Stalingrad had to be captured, no matter what the cost would be to the German army. His officers increasingly told him to withdraw the Sixth Army and knew it would be dangerous. But Hitler refused and told the German citizens, "You may rest assuredly that no one will ever drive out of Stalingrad," on the radio. The weather was getting worse as time progressed. First there were heavy rain that turned the streets into seas of mud. Then it began snowing on October 19th. Paulus made a lot of progress and captured almost 90% of the city by this time. But the battle was not over yet. Although the Sixth Army controlled much of the city, its supplies were dwindling. They were running out of food and ammunition. On the 10th of November 1942, the Sixth Army launched another major attack on the city. But by then, the Red Army was stronger and caused heavy casualties on Paulus's troops. The Germans were beginning to retreat. But before long, Hitler ordered them to stop. Hitler knew that there was a danger of encirclement. He still wanted them to capture Stalingrad, but it was too late. Paulus's army was surrounded. The tide was turning to Joseph Stalin. The Sixth Army desperately needed supplies now in December. The army needed 300 tons to adequately fight. The soldiers were living on 1/5 of a loaf of bread a day. Hitler finally learned that the Sixth Army might have to be starved into surrender, so he sent Field Marshal Erich von Manstein to attempt to rescue them. Manstein managed to get away within 30 miles of Stalingrad, but was then brought to a halt by the Red Army. On the 27th of December 1942, Manstein decided to withdraw as he was also in danger of being encircled by Soviet troops. By January 1943, the Germans had barely any food left, which effectively meant that 12,000, or about half, of his forces were given no rations. The Sixth Army continued to fight on. The Sixth Army under Paulus finally surrendered on January 31st, 1943, with the last of the Germans surrendered 2 days later. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. Stalin had a significant role in this turning point of World War II. He was the leader behind all of Soviet operations in Stalingrad. He initially did not want Russia to participate in the war, because at first he was sure Hitler would have honored their agreement. But even he secretly knew that war would be imminent. He massively prepared the Russian army. At first, the Soviets suffered heavy losses. Even a year after the German invasion, Stalin's troops suffered many times more casualties than the Germans ever did. Stalin was not ready to give up his country yet. He worked closer with his officials and generals. Whenever the Nazis faltered, Stalin took advantage of the opportunity. Under his command, the Russians won 4 of the greatest battles in World War II: Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk, and the final confrontation in Berlin. Stalin helped to end the war with his strategic planning and carefully selected orders. Hitler declared later in February, "The god of war has gone over to the other side."